So let's talk about the new album. Your third full length is called To Weep for Unconquered Worlds.
It is.
And it was released near the beginning of this year, 2022. When did you start working on this album?
Well, so Revenant was recorded in 2015. That's our previous album. Didn't come out till 2018 because DIY is slow. And we'd begun writing ideas in 2017.
Can you just expand on that idea for a second? Why is DIY slow?
Why is DIY? Because basically the way we tend to release things is we get a bunch of labels. I think Revenant had like 13 labels. I should have the record handy with me so I can reference it properly. But it had 13 labels, I think it was, involved in releasing it. And I can't name half of them, just too much. But like, obviously it takes a while to get the money together, really. It's generally financial and it can be organizational, but generally just getting the money together to put out, like, I think we pressed 900 copies of Revenant, so it wasn't cheap. So it just took a while in that regard. Pissed about with the mix on it. We had William Blackmon, the man who we recorded with. He's the drummer from Gadget. He has a I think it's sort of mid-Sweden. We went out there in February to record Revenant. Beautiful. Snowy. We recorded like an old church. It was incredible. And I mean, you can tell it was recorded in a good studio. It sounds really nice. We'll never sound that good again. But like, it's just a long, slow process. And it took a while to come out, which can be frustrating, but you get used to it. And like I said, it's more about having fun doing things. So when it's out, it's cool. So yeah, and it just like, I think we might have written this album faster, but it would have been very different had Revenant come out like, within a year or two of its release, recording rather than 3, basically. But I think it benefited from that, actually, because we wrote a bunch of material in 2017. Most of it got pulled to pieces or scrapped. And then once Revenant came out, we kind of felt like the air had cleared and we just became a lot more creative. And throughout 2019, we wrote the album. And a lot of that, like I said, a lot of the groundwork had been laid, and it was a case of fleshing things out, developing ideas, rewriting songs, maybe scrapping songs, until we felt we had enough material and we had like an album that flowed. We'd start thinking about the sequencing of the songs fairly early once it starts to come together. That's quite important. I think it's really important for grindcore. The album, if you want people to sit through 20 minutes of it, it needs to flow quite well. I think that's something a lot of bands tend to do wrong, actually, is have albums that are too long or just like kind of like the songs just to kind of bunch together in a weird way and you kind of find yourself skipping through it. I'm not saying that our album isn't like that, obviously. It's not for me to say. But one of my aims every time we do an album, particularly from Revenant onwards, has been to make sure that people can sit through it without feeling they need to skip. Because if it's only 20 minutes long and people are skipping through it, then that's kind of shit, really, isn't it?
It does flow quite well. It, in that regard, it reminds me of World Downfall or the Repulsion album, just because it's an album that, for as many songs as it is, and fair enough, it's a short album, but it's an album that you can listen to from beginning to end without pause. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you.
So you spoke a little bit about how your guitar playing has changed or has affected the way you write songs. With regards to this album, how would you say To Weep for Unconquered Worlds is different from what you've done previously?
It's really different to our first full length and like the kind of splits and demos and EPs we did before doing Stillborn Nation, because like the band is different. We've got a different bass player and the songwriting dynamic is very different with Luke. He contributes a lot more, even if it's just feedback, but a lot of the time it is direct ideas. And that obviously...
When you say feedback, you mean noise, right? Not,
he might go, I don't like that, or like, that's too many slow parts, or, we could do...
Oh, I see.
It could be, it could be anything, or it could be, I really like that, it could be, or, I think that as times when I felt more confident playing guitar how I want to play guitar, really. In that, and I listened back to Stillborn Nation the other day, actually, and I was like, quite a lot of things I wouldn't do like that now. For starters, I play well. But yeah, I mean, like to me now, it sounds like quite an embryonic album compared to like definitely Revenant, which I'm quite proud of. I'm very happy with how that album turned out. But like Revenant still has that kind of character to the guitar that our new one has. It's just that like my guitar playing's improved and my ability to kind of like translate ideas I have in my head has become like more sort of developed and just more confident, really. And I think that like also being less sort of concerned about playing classic grind, I think, as well. I think I even was saying, like, when we were writing it, like, I don't think I'm really going to write any grind riffs for this one, I did. But, I imagine myself writing like sort of like micro prog metal parts for like the blasting sections. And that has actually sort of, it kind of is that. I think like there is a lot of that in there, but yeah, obviously it's like put through like a dissonant filter and it's played so fast that you wouldn't listen to it and think it sounds like prog metal. Obviously it's grindcore. But that's the thing with grindcore, it's like it can absorb multiple genres and still remain what it is. Because like I said at the start, it's been pushed to the very limits of what metal and punk can tolerate. So, you know, if you're playing in that sort of style, like an almost atavistic approach to music, really. Although I don't know if I'd call grindcore where it is now atavistic, because it's kind of become so sort of, it's been turned over so many times and iterated upon so many times that it may have lost some of that immediacy that I associate with the 80s style of grindcore, which is absolutely very atavistic form of music. You know, pushing music to the absolute limits. It's as extreme as it can be. Where do you go from here? You now sound like a band being pushed down the stairs. Like, what next? You know, and there's something very feral and sort of primal about it as well. It comes through that. Whether that sort of creates that sound or if it's a result of that sound, it depends on the band. But yeah, like just once when you're operating within that framework, whatever you put into it, you know, if you're playing with like a good rhythm section that kind of like well versed at playing super fast and staying just in control, but on the brink of chaos and making it feel like a train that's about to go off the tracks, but it's going to stay on the tracks. You know, it will stay. It's not coming off, but it's close. You know, when you take a fast turn, it maybe a couple of wheels kind of lift off, and they set themselves back down again. You know, like it's always going to be grindcore. I think really, like if you're playing that way. So you have the sort of freedom to put whatever you want into it, really.
Would you say that you're more adventurous in terms of rhythms, the rhythms in your riff writing?
I mean, more adventurous than what? You mean just compared to what we used to do? If so, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Sort of putting those kind of weird groove parts in, where it sort of snaps kind of rigidly or fluidly, depending on the song, into something that kind of stomps or slithers. I've always liked a sort of slithery part, like, you know, I call them kaiju riffs, where it kind of goes stomp, 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 and then you've got the slithering tail that follows behind it, you know. So I don't know, but we've always done that. I think it's just probably better executed. And I think the songwriting has improved each time we've iterated our sound and written a new record. So I think that like it's more those ideas are just expressed in a more like pertinent manner each time. And I think we've gotten quite good at dropping concisely into like a beat down and then exploding back out into a fast part without just sounding like fucking nails or some shit like that, you know.
How much of the sound and the way that the guitars and the rhythm section interplay with each other has to do with the fact that you're the sole guitarist, and so a lot of what drives the song is on your shoulders?
Well, I mean, obviously that's the thing with a power trio. I think that it's like everyone contributes equally in a good power trio, like classic era Motorhead. That's what I always kind of like think of as like what I like a band to be. In a band that's a three-piece, I always compare to like that sort of 70s Motorhead, early 80s through the early 80s. That for me is kind of like the pinnacle of an effective sort of metal or punk band playing as a three-piece. And I think we all I don't think that I carry anything. I think that I actually let the rhythm section really carry things, and the guitar is like the melodic device on top. I know it sounds absurd, I keep saying this, to call it melodic, but I mean it is. It's just not like to a traditional melody. So I don't know. Because I'm also doing vocals, especially live. You know, obviously in rehearsals, but you have a lot more leeway. But when you're playing live, I keep it like as tight as I can, but it's loose where it can be. You know.
Where did you end up recording this?
We did this with our friend Dan Couch. He plays in a band alongside our drummer Sam called Helpless, who are really cool, kind of maybe sort of slightly prog tinged, but they're sort of like a metallic hardcore band, but they're coming from a very dissonant angle. It's much more dissonant than what Hugh and Cull do. Not as fast either. It's like I said, more like metallic hardcore than grind, but they have an influence of that, obviously. But anyway, yeah, he works at a studio in Plymouth, and it's like a little community project. It's quite cool, really quite basic, but it's like got everything you need there. Sounds decent, and he knows his way around that studio really well. And it was easy to record with him there because we've been friends with him for years. He's recorded us multiple times in the past, and you know, just trust him, and you can allow him to give sort of production input, like on guitar sound and things like that, and takes. What's a good take? What's a bad take? So he's a really good person to work with. You know, he does more than just push record. He has quite a lot of direct input. He's really good.
And he didn't just engineer the album; he mixed it and mastered it as well, right?
Did everything. Yeah, it was entirely his work.
In terms of feedback on production, what was the feedback that you gave him? How did you want this album to sound?
crisp and clear, but still raw and punchy. I wanted it to sound throaty and aggressive, but I wanted it to be like clear so you could hear the riffs. I don't actually like it that much when bands have more complicated riffs. Obviously, if you're going for the jugular with real basic stuff, if it's just a blur, that's fine. When bands start to kind of incorporate more technical ideas into their music, the production doesn't really reflect that. I mean, you can still be really good. Don't get me wrong. I like a lot of records that are muddy as fuck, but and are burying actually some quite interesting ideas. But obviously, when you set out to record something and you're playing more intricate parts, you imagine people being able to hear what's going on. So that was from the guitar side of things. Well, as rough and raw as possible while still maintaining clarity. Perhaps like almost like slightly glassy 80s thrash edge to it as well. Because I love the sound of those kind of records. Like Testament's first album would be a touch point for guitar sound for me. And also, obviously, things like Entombed, if you're going more death metal side. I can't say I was looking too much at grind. I mean, I suppose Terrorizer, World Downfall, but that's a death metal guitar sound anyway, not Repulsion. Again, I wanted something with more clarity and perhaps more of a classic metal sound to it. Discordance Axis, but thicker as well. Yeah. And those would have been my sort of band type touch points for it.
Now, as you mentioned, you've worked with Dan since your first EP.
Yeah.
Why has this partnership lasted as long as it has?
He knows what he's doing. He has always given productive, interesting, intelligent feedback. He's got a good work ethic. I like the stuff I think what he's done for Human Cull has always sounded at least decent when we started out with him. And as he's grown as a producer and an engineer, and we've grown as a band, we've sort of grown together. I think it's just been a really good working relationship. And the only thing we didn't record with Dan's involvement was, well, actually, that's not true. When we did Revenant, we did the instrumental part of the album with William Blackmore, but we actually did the vocals with Dan. So yeah, he has actually worked on everything. Yeah. Just familiarity and the fact that he's good and that we get on with him really well. And he's a good lad.
Yeah, and he did a really good job in this album.
Yeah, it's just a winning combination of talent and likability.